facility on the right-hand side of your screen. And we are with such a number of people that it is not possible really to ask questions live, but you will certainly have an opportunity to ask them, to grill them, so to speak.
How have been the other 2 days, Guus? It's Marleen, because it's the first time I joined.
Yes, well, interesting, and not without small technical problems, but overall I would say in very good mood, and I really enjoyed it. But this is the sort of question you should not ask the organizers. But the people who are now safely muted.
I will ask later to the others. Okay.
And Marleen, could you kindly switch off your mic? Thank you. Hello from Bamako. First city outside of Europe I visited.
I am also outside Europe.
Okay.
Rene is here from.
Yeah, I think I'll make a start. Welcome again, everybody, on this third day and our webinar about the COVID-19 pandemic and land governance, hosted by LANDac, together with the Land Portal Foundation and the Land Dialogue. I'll briefly mention what they are doing in a moment. And the idea is that today we will discuss the impact of the pandemic on land rights, land governance, and land governance institutions. And we will base ourselves in part on people close to the ground, in this case, particularly East Africa, with some of their observations, but we'll also make use of some efforts that have been going on. LANDac, together with the Land Dialogue, have conducted, and still conducting, I think, a quick scan survey. So we'll start with some highlights or some points from that briefly, because a lot of the finding of the survey will also reappear, or will appear in the discourses of the other panelists, and we don't want to have too much overlap. And another important, or two more important, flows of information that we'll try to capitalize on are the discussion series, Land Rights Implications of COVID-19, conducted by the Land Portal Foundation and its partners in recent weeks. I'm sure a lot of you have contributed to that or have consulted it. And also we have some inputs from the LANDac fellows, which I'll also briefly return to. My name is Guus van Westen. I'm one of two LANDac chairs when Annelies Somers, for more than 9 years chair, decided to stay active in LANDac, but no longer as chair. And we decided we needed at least two people to fill her shoes. I'm one of the two. We have an interesting panel for you. I think at this point, perhaps we do the practicals first. Neil Sorensen, who is the technical guy. If anything technical goes wrong, I blame Neil. Please take note. Neil, perhaps you can give us some marching orders.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Guus. Neil Sorensen here from the Land Portal Foundation. You know, yesterday, as we faced some technical problems and switching to the parallel sessions, we have decided to shift the parallel sessions, which will be taking place immediately after this event, to separate events. And I'll paste right here in the chat right now to everyone the links that for the two webinars that will be taking place via separate links, that you have all registered for one of the 3 parallel sessions that will be occurring after this. So in the chat, you will see mitigation of GHG emissions through effective peatland management and the corresponding link, and towards new realities, monitoring land-based investments before, during, after, and COVID-19. And please join those parallel sessions using the corresponding links in the chat. If we've already shared with you those links via email, if you have registered for that. For the blockchain parallel session, which is hosted by John Dean Markunis, it will be taking place here in this same session immediately following the plenary session, if you will. So just please stay here if this is the session that you signed up for. So that's the housekeeping for this event, and thanks again for participating.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. And good indeed, check the chat for information. Blockchainers stay here, the others use one of the two links. Our panel today then, we'll start with Chantal Wickert, who is the LANDac coordinator and who will tell us something about the results of the online survey. And then we have Frida Gituku. Frida is the executive director of Roots Kenya. That's an NGO working at the grassroots level with women in Kenya, doing a lot of work on equal rights for women. And Frida is also one of the LANDac Fellows. LANDac Fellows are professionals in a number of countries working with local organizations and who are the eyes and ears of LANDac in the respective countries, and who together are a network exchanging information and also conducting research on land rights issues. Then we have Jimmy Ochom, who is the land rights coordinator of Oxfam. Jimmy is based in Uganda, according to my information. Jimmy, I hope that's correct. And but does not just cover Uganda. He has a wider purview on our subjects today. The third or fourth actually panelist is Laura Meggiolaro. My Italian is far from perfect, Laura. Laura is the team leader at the Land Portal Foundation, one of the host organizations today. And the Land Portal, I think you are familiar with, is really a giant communicator in terms of anything relating to land rights, and it also taking care of the more technical side of the LANDac encounter. And then last but not least, Alke Geirat. Alke is the facilitator of the Land Dialogue in the Netherlands. And that is a multi-stakeholder platform instigated by the Minister of International Trade and Development Cooperation. In Alke's own words, I couldn't put it as nicely here, bringing together different stakeholders to find common ground in seeking solutions in land governance issues. So Alke will, I hope, definitely contribute to solutions, and she also runs her own company, Cohere. We are going to do this in, no, first we're going to listen to Chantal on some of the results of the quick scan survey. So Chantal, I suggest you take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Guus. As Guus already mentioned, at LANDac, we are of course highly worried about the impact of COVID-19 on land rights and land governance. And as LANDac, we see it as our shared duty to monitor and document the changes under the pandemic and to see how they affect land access. But also, we problematize the ensuring dispossession and inequality we have seen so far. So one of our roles as LANDac is to ask questions and collect preliminary answers to these questions. And we've done so through the initiatives Guus already mentioned. So this is the survey we conducted together with the Land Dialogue. But also through the online discussion we moderated together with the Land Portal. And some of the preliminary results we have found through these initiatives, which of course our panelists will also further reflect on today. I have selected some of these results, and firstly, we noticed that one of the most frequently shared worries is the restricted or limited access to land under lockdown. and the impact this has on food security. But we also saw distress sales of land due to loss of income or livelihoods. And we need to understand better who is actually losing out as their livelihoods get undermined, or as pressures on land increase in the places where people live. And so far, it has been suggested that these effects are particularly detrimental for women. Secondly, we also saw from our results that many land administration programs and informational campaigns have been delayed or even come to a halt under several countries' lockdown. And at the same time, we noticed that these lockdown measures have also greatly reduced the opportunities for CSOs to provide support to local communities. And we need to ask ourselves what happens with these land administration services, both organized by the state, but also the customary community-based forms of land governance. And what happens if these are fully or partly interrupted? And thirdly, we are worried about what happens to civil society advocacy. So early on, we already noticed that there were indications that civil society was under heavy pressure. On the one hand, due to lockdown measures, but also as democratic controls have been suspended. We are asking ourselves how has this been developing? And have CSOs and communities been able to monitor large-scale land acquisitions and concessions? And lastly, but not but importantly, what happens to investments? We noticed that the pandemic offers, at least theoretically, a window of opportunity for large-scale and small-scale investors. And countries might be even less inclined to put conditions on such investments. For example, to curb the economic consequences of the pandemic, but maybe also for personal rewards through new investments. But we also need to look at smaller scales. So are there opportunities for people to concentrate land while others have to sell their land out of economic distress? So these are a bit the preliminary results from our survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. So very briefly outlining 4 areas of concern. Access generally, that's in trouble because of lockdown measures. Services being down, reducing the scope for civil society, advocacy, and investments that are being affected. After this broad scope, I'd like to ask Frida to add her voice to this discussion. You, with your work in growth Kenya, what is it that you observe?
Thank you. Thank you, Gus. Thank you very much. I will reflect from the perspective of women and girls, because that's the area or the constituency that we work with. And I will say that land rights are the most contested rights for women and girls after bodily rights, and because of the stake that this resource offer to them and to the entire population. There's been little progress, and this progress we can attribute it to the resistance movement, to the resistance by the land rights movement, because that's what have characterized the land sector. And I think COVID just compounded the problem. The first response from government after COVID-19 was to ban public gathering. And that means that, of course, undermined our capacity to do collective organizing and action. And this is very crucial for the land sector and for the land rights movement. In Africa, since 2015, the African rural women have been organizing under the Women to Kilimanjaro movement. We adopted a very progressive charter, and there were notable progress that we had made, including the adoption of this charter by the EU, allocation of resources, acceptance of some of the demands by the member states. But when this COVID happened, first, it means that the collective action that the rural women were having from the village level to the national level to the AU level had to be halted. Growth was supporting such action in Mozambique, Tanzania, and Kenya with support from the Dutch government and the Africa Women Development Fund. Unfortunately, we've had to pause, and this comes with its own challenges. And the women, I would say at this point in time, they are really just passive consumer of COVID news, when they had been engaged previously in more progressive advocacy. It's also surprising for us. Most recently, we saw the Kenya government throwing out residents, what we call forced eviction from one of the urban areas. We call it Kariobangi in Nairobi. And it's sad that it happened at this time when the court sessions in the country have been slowed down, of course, as part of the response mechanism by the judiciary. And so this category of people have very limited option in terms of seeking remedy. The Ministry of Lands as well, soon after COVID happened, they closed the land registry. And within a duration of 4 months or so, I would say the ministry has also introduced new land regulations or amendments. I think there are around 14 of them. And personally, I was surprised to see the ministry very active in developing new regulation, which is not what I know them for. There was one that was trying to create the office of the ombudsman, and as non-state actors, we convened and we attempted to object to this amendment because we did not understand who is demanding for this office and why at this particular time. So the effect on collective organizing and advocacy is real. It has almost put the land movement to sleep, which is quite unfortunate because the stakes here are very high. In terms of the disruption of services, I've mentioned that the land registries in the country were closed. Just yesterday, the ministry issued a circular and said that they are closing the office for 1 week for fumigation. I don't know why they are fumigating for 1 week. I think fumigation can be done for 1 day. And those who are familiar with the Women Land Rights Charter, the African Women Land Rights Charter, most of the demands by the rural women are actually for reforms is on land administration services and the judiciary. But this is what have been disrupted and slowed down, pushing women further into the edge. But what I also see in the country is that there is an emerging silent cartel that is privatizing these services. So if you have money, of course, this is corruption, you can pay for it and you will get it. But if your values don't allow you to engage in corrupt activities, then you have to contend with lack of those services, which is definitely not good for our cause. One of our members was recently complaining that they are not able to discharge their title deed that they placed as bonds for their sons. I also know that they are ongoing informal trading in the informal market, trading of land, and we all know as actors here that this is a recipe for future conflict. One last thing that I would like to mention is about gender-based violence. There have been a spike in gender-based violence, I think globally, but one of the manifestations of this in this part of the continent is women being thrown out of their matrimonial homes and land. And Groots has a model that we call the community watchdog model that track disinheritance and dispossessions at the village level. And we've also seen a lot of increase in cases of disinheritance, specifically around this time. And these victims have no option. It's either they flee or they work with the alternative justice mechanism, which sometimes is effective, other times is not effective.
Thank you, Frida, for this clarification. Much of what you say is more a detailing of some of the points that Chantal raised, but you also add a number of things, like the gender dimension. Jimmy, from your position in Uganda, what would you like to add to this? And not necessarily limited yourself to Uganda, of course. Still on the impact and the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Gus. I would shift my conversation around food security, because that is what Oxfam is looking towards this year and the years to come. So, so we have realized that for many countries whose GDPs depend on agriculture, COVID has hit the most, especially countries in the global south. And that is a matter of concern. And we have seen increases in issues of food insecurity, hunger in the developed countries. I must say they are the most hit. But with lockdowns and curfews, we have seen these have been escalated. We have what we call limited ability for farmers to engage in agriculture because of the, particularly in Uganda and West Africa, you have to leave. If you have a farm very far away from where you stay, you have to leave the gardens in the middle of the day, otherwise you'll be caught up by curfew. So that means that the produce that is being produced in farms is not reaching the markets, and it is ending up rotting and causing a number of food insecurities in different countries, especially in West Africa and Uganda. And we see that there are reduced accesses to market. I know that some countries have locked down their airports, some have even locked them completely, unlike Uganda, which has tried to open up importation and exportation. But other countries have decided not even to have importations and exportations happen. So meaning that we have, for countries like Uganda that produce a lot of food, the food is wasted. It is not reaching other countries. That's a very big challenge. And then small farmers are hit the hardest. Many have not been able to sell. They are producing a lot, but they're not able to sell. That's a very big challenge. And it is affecting the urban centers because the urban people who are in their houses locked up cannot be able to access the food that is gotten from the different areas. So that's a big challenge. Financial difficulties have led to many things that I know Frida has talked about, like children's education and domestic violence. We were seeing difficulty in, we are seeing families distorted because of such kind of lack of money, especially those families that live on hand to mouth. So that's a big challenge, and we look at it as something that COVID has really increased. Most governments, especially South Sudan and Tanzania, which have decided to forget about COVID and pretend like it's not there, do not have any plans to set in motion to assist the poor and provide relief packages. I know that some countries like Kenya have tried to come up with economic stimuluses, but they do not reach with the level of how African countries are set up and some other countries are set up. That stimulus is not reaching the farmers, and it's continuing with the food insecurity all over those countries. Lastly, I would like to say that a small survey was done by the Oxfam team, and we realized that 40% of the agricultural land are not cultivated because people are seated at home. And even if you say you want to cultivate, why would you go to cultivate when you know that your produce will not reach the market because of the limitations that are there? You're not even certain of whether you'll be able, especially those ones who are doing exporting and importing. So lots of lands are being left bare and cultivated, and it is really impacting on the food security of the country. This has been reported in West African countries, South African countries, and most especially East African countries. I will stop there for now. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Yeah, I have one small question. You talked about African countries, but you also covered, you mentioned Colombia, Indonesia at one point. Is it very different?
I beg your pardon?
Outside of Africa?
It's the same problem in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's the same problem that has been reported in Brazil. These issues I've mentioned are happening because it's also a country that is largely dependent on agriculture. Yeah. So we looked at all the countries. They may not be in the global south, but those which really depend on agriculture have been affected most because their GDPs depend on that. Yes.
No, I wanted to make the point that it's not just an African problem.
Yeah, it's not just an African.
Indeed, yeah. And then Laura. Based on the extensive online survey that you conducted with several partner organizations, what would you like to add to what we've heard so far?
Thank you, Gus. Thank you for the opportunity of being here and then collaborating with LANDac in this webinar and the LANDac online encounter and the online discussion over the past weeks were really a good experience. And a great collaboration. So thank you first. So good afternoon. My name is Laura Meggiolaro. I'm team leader of the Line Porter Foundation. I want to bring here a slightly different perspective because the Land Portal, as a provider of data and information and knowledge services, we pay particular attention to the barriers that can influence the way people consume and access information, which we know that can influence transparency and accountability. And this was also corroborated by some work that we have done last year with GIZ. So what we have seen over the past 6 or 10 months is there is an amazing appetite for information that is accurate, timely, and reliable. And this has brought to the surface some information-related issues. Well, first of all, as my colleagues has just pointed out, public, not just land, but many public administration services were suspended. And this means, from our perspectives, from the information perspective, that fundamental rights like access to information has also been undermined, right? So a particular heavy burden has been, of course, paid by less developed countries and less developed administrations with weaker land, where the services are predominantly paper-based. They have been, they are handled in person, where a digital environment is not yet the norm. I know Kenya has been discussing and implementing and piloting some innovative services, but it's not still ongoing, and also there is a low ICT capacity among public officers, and there is not, let's say, an enabling environment for open data. And I wanted to add also that half of the population in the world doesn't have access to internet yet. So this is a problem. So the second issue that is connected to that is because of the lockdown has forced administration and public offices in general in all countries to operate in a kind of a situation of semi-informality, where record keeping has become more difficult. Decision making is being done in new ways through more informal, quicker meetings. So people struggling to apply transparency rules, not at least as before. So no minutes, and as Frida just mentioned now, no participatory mechanism in place. So in a situation where open data is not a standard already in public administration, of course, this has increased the room for all sort of informal arrangements and practices. So the situation, of course, is worsened by the fact that oversight watchdog bodies are closing up, and community level structures involved in with this oversight role are not operating, right? So this
watchdog would like you to round off this round.
Pardon?
This watchdog, which is me, would like you to round off your contribution.
So the situation of this kind of a lack of governance from one end, and the kind of a reduced civic space and reduced presence of these oversight bodies, so naturally generates a situation of less participation and lack of transparency and less accountability, as well as lack of collaboration, which is a very important element in the accountability and transparency exercise. So another very interesting aspect in this crisis, which is maybe not related, strictly related to land, is more generic, but it can affect all sectors, is that the crisis has allowed governments all over the world to restrict freedom on the basis of extraordinary circumstances, but also increasing control. So more viciously, there are certain surveillance technologies and measures that have increased, giving the public a sense of security in controlling the spread of the virus. But we must remain vigilant as information providers and mindful of the continued use of these technologies after the pandemic. So a substantial amount of data is being collected by government, but most importantly by private firms for profitable also reasons. So we must remain very vigilant about that, because this data initially monitoring the infection and the COVID cases are also monitoring where people live, where people work, the network of contact. So they are going to kind of go beyond simply controlling the spread of the virus itself.
Warning, yes.
Yeah. So more generally, what does it mean in generic term? It means that
in one sentence.
Yeah, it is just 2 sentences. This architecture, this information architecture, which is not a pre or post COVID thing, is more an extension of existing surveillance architecture infrastructure of information, has been contexted already before. Now, as with the regulations becoming looser and civic right becoming weaker, has become, I mean, there are people talking about new data colonialism, right? Maybe it's a strong word, but it is.
Maybe you can pursue this point in a moment when talking about.
May create some traditional imbalances and dynamics of power related to how people access data may increase. And
thank you. And Alke, your turn.
Thank you, Guus, for giving me and handing me the floor. I think I've been listening very carefully about the previous, from the previous panelists, because I think I want to take a moment of rest to make my point. So what the problem is with land rights, in my perception, and I'm filling up, I think, the space between the problem mapping that the LANDac and the knowledge institutions are doing, and the information gathering that the land portal is doing. My position is very modest. I am representing the land dialogue, which is only linked to Dutch players. And so I have a little bit within this panel of very large speakers coming from the floor or from the ground and from the community speaking on their behalf. I have a bit of a national complex. It's called the Calimero complex. It's a very small bird, and it's saying all the time, and it's actually the complex of the Netherlands as well, internationally. Even though we're big, we're saying all the time, you know, I'm small and the others are big, and it's completely unfair. And what I noticed in the whole world system, which is why inequality is growing, is that we have a system failure. And the problem with land rights is that it has different dimensions. So it's a multi-sectoral problem, and it's it's like a matrix. So it's multi-sectoral, and it has different dimensions when it comes to the trias politica. So there's all kinds of institutions involved. And there's different actors involved. So what I've been doing during COVID is not only there was a lockdown, but I also went inside and I thought about how to go about the system. And I've developed a sort of a process which I want to test in probably one of the most difficult contexts, which is Brazil. And since it's my position to do practical implementation, I am inviting people because we've been hearing a lot of problems, and I want to contribute to the solutions of it. So I'm inviting people. I will put down on the website of the Land Dialogue, which is connected to the LANDac website. Within 2 weeks, I will put down an invitation for people to fill in practical solutions, ideas. It can only be connected, unfortunately, to the Dutch players. And I will explain it on the website, the total thing of it, because I think that otherwise we stand the threat that we keep on talking about all the huge problems that are coming in our way, which is all connected to the fact that there is a growing pressure on the system, not only on the system as a whole, connected to the Sustainable Development Goals, but also to the people that are living inside of it. And that is causing growing violence. It's causing suppression. We have a lot of movements like Black Lives Matters, a lot of movements. It's like the whole system is boiling, and it's failing. It's failing to take care of the poor. And well, I'll finalize because otherwise Guus is going to kill me. I was in Geneva in 2000 and I had to go to Washington. I was that time working for the UN. And I went to the World Bank and there I found a report. It was beautiful. It was called Voices of the Poor, Crying Out for Change. It was a report whereby the World Bank interviewed 3,000 poor people, asking their perception and their perspective on their poverty situation and what they found most important or where they wanted to see change within the system. And basically what I discovered in the report was that it wasn't because they didn't have enough food to eat. It wasn't the food here. It was the food that they were not taking seriously, that nobody was actually listening to them, that they were not treated as human beings. They were just treated as nothingness. Now, that will finalize my story, that if you look at my Calimero complex, which is the Netherlands, and you know that Brazil also has a nationality complex, it's called the straw dog. I think that the worst thing that you can do in communication to Brazil, for example, would be to kick the dog, because then it will probably get even more tense. That's where I finalize my discussion. I hope to see you on the website with practical ideas. Thank you, Guus.
Thank you, Alke. Perhaps you can give details of the website in the chat.
In 2 weeks, eh?
Okay,
the 15th, right. Yes.
Yeah, good.
But I will make an announcement now so that everybody can line up.
Sure, yes.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, sorry, I have to chase you up, but we have to make sure that everybody gets their share. And there's also some space to engage with questions of the audience. We go back to Laura, whom I brutally cut off at one point. But now we go to a next set of questions. That's basically what should happen? What should we do? What solutions do you see? Or what can we do? Laura, what have you harvested?
Yes, just along the line of what I was saying, I think there is a declining level of trust that has risen over the past months. So we need to bring that trust back, and the trust need to be brought back through openness and participation. So people need to understand how decisions are being made and how they can make informed decisions. So there are wonderful examples that brought up in the online discussion. What Namati is doing, for instance, with the paralegals, it goes in that direction in many countries. It's a wonderful work. There is also a link between transparency and participation, as I said already, and cooperation. And here is wonderful work, for instance, that's an organization in Kenya, Reconcile, is doing, organizing this radio talk shows involving the government and the civil society, discussing about COVID-related issues. This has had a great success and an overwhelming participation. Is a good example of rebuilding the trust. The question we ask ourselves as a data provider is how people can be empowered with data. What we have seen, again, maybe not directly related to land, but can be applied to the land sector, is the rise of this increasing creation of these knowledge commons that has exploded over the past months. So accessible repositories of knowledge that focus on specific topics that are collectively owned and governed by communities for mutual gains. These are kind of examples of collaborations that work. So new online platforms have been created for specialists, for running specific projects, but they are run by groups and have this role of sharing and sharing knowledge is very important. Another thing I want to raise is we need to be vigilant about, which is related to the last point that I was trying to explain, of this increase in control of information, because information is power and can create enormous imbalances of power depending on who controls information. So we need to be vigilant about that. So information needs to be treated as a public good. And what is important is to keep nurturing this right kind of dynamics where the information ecosystem has important elements like leadership, freedom of choice, agency are guaranteed. And again, the trust, especially at the local level. I saw in the online discussion, for instance, a very nice example of community operated digital land information systems and the great role that they can have in protecting land rights and more importantly, through accessibility, but also the social acceptance and the trust and the community participation. So again, there's knowledge commons, but at the local level, ensuring the participation of the community, those are important solutions we should look into. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's return to Frida. Frida, what can you suggest in terms of what is necessary to do and what we can do?
I agree with the suggestion from Rora, especially around data and information. But I think we need to be more strategic with the partnership. And I'm thinking from a national context. The Kenya Bureau of Statistics released a report just recently in May on the socio-economic household impact of COVID-19, and that's wave 1. So the government is, the Bureau is going to release a series of reports within the year. But land and land rights were not among the parameters that they were measuring. And I'm thinking the Bureau sits in a very privileged position because their reports are fairly consumed by both the line ministries, which have the mandate to effect the things that we are talking about, but also other multi-stakeholders. So if we are to track and monitor these impacts of COVID systematically and in a manner that our data and also the information that we generate is put into use, it would be strategic to explore partnership with national statistical offices that have a mandate on that area. The other thing, of course, ourselves as a LANDac community, Utrecht University, we occupy a privileged position in terms of processing data and information for public consumption. And there is unlimited opportunity for documenting the COVID impact on land rights for different audiences. And I know the LANDac Professional Fellowship Program is investing in that area. That's an investment, that's a good investment. We definitely, and this is something the Global South can learn from the North, we definitely need to enhance our digital activism and organizing, learn from movements, maybe like the Me Too movement, because that's now the space that we have right now to influence policies and law. And lastly, I will talk about integrating technology and internet connectivity as a top advocacy issue that we should speak about to government. Our census results, I was looking at it this morning when I was preparing for this session, and there's an indicator on the proportion of the population aged 3 and above using internet in Kenya. And you'll see that in the urban area, it is 42.5%, which is something, but it is not, I mean, it should be more than that. And in the rural areas, it's 37.7%. What does that mean for land administration? When we are talking about digitization, and I saw the conversation on the chat around community digital land system, but we see only 13.7% of the rural population is accessing or using internet in a country like Kenya, and I guess it would be a reflection of Africa. Then there's a bit of work that has to be done around internet connectivity and technology, if this is to make sense.
Okay, thank you. We continue our round around the panel and go back to Jimmy. I see you already switched your mic on. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Yes. I would not like to repeat what my colleagues have said, but I would like to reiterate myself on the issue of food security in the world. What we need to know is that some of our efforts to fight poverty are on fast rewind. We have to go back and start making sure that those efforts that we have been doing in the past years are brought back to a certain level. We have seen the most affected being countries in the global south. So we need to fasten and realize that the pandemic has taken us back, and we need to fasten and be able to answer some of the, be able to mitigate some of the challenges that we are facing globally. We need to strengthen and integrate the national and regional food systems to eradicate poverty. So we know that there are different systems in different countries. In
Sorry, Jimmy,
different
could you talk a little bit slower?
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
So we need to strengthen and integrate the national and regional food systems in eradicating food security and malnutrition in African continents and other continents. So we need to see that countries need to open up slowly, because for those economies that are dependent on agriculture, they need to move out of the bubble and realize that steps have to be taken for countries to continue moving. Otherwise, we shall reach a level where we cannot continue giving relief to certain countries, or certain countries may not start thinking about themselves. So we need to prepare the world to receive this. We are seeing agricultural services to small-scale farmers, including supply of seeds. So we have to do this again, as I mentioned earlier. We are going to go back to zero, to start afresh, to enable these farmers wake up and realize that they have to go to the farms, go to the fields, produce food, and then we have to make sure that we develop mechanisms of making sure that their food gets to the market. I would like to reiterate what Faith talked about, digitization. How do we get our food to the markets through the different platforms, digital platforms that we have, so that we don't seem to be in the same bubble. The last one is provide social safety nets to protect those who are in the worst affected and most vulnerable countries. I know that World Bank, EU, and lots of global stakeholders have come to the rescue of so many countries, not only African countries, but other countries. We have seen subsidized loans. We have seen loans given to those different countries to be able to speak to some of those challenges in the countries, and we expect this to grow, and we expect these global stakeholders to continue providing such safety nets for the most affected. Most countries in the global south should provide alternative ways to make judgments on cases that affect small-scale farmers. These are some of the things that I'm looking at that we should encourage in the years to come or time to come. Thank you very much.
Jimmy, perhaps I make use of the opportunity I have to come with a question. We emphasize that so far, especially the rural side of land. But what I understand is actually the whole food chain is facing problems. Perhaps not everywhere, but in different countries. I mean, it's in some cases it's farmers not even being able to go to their fields. Then what you also mentioned, it's a problem of getting the produce to market. So it's a logistics question. We also have reports from LANDac fellows that in some cases, for instance, vendors in cities are no longer finding clients because they are working in areas of office complexes that are closed or markets that are closed. And so on that side also, that there can be a block down. And then there is the whole issue of getting food to or for city dwellers to get access to food. Can you also elaborate a little bit on that side?
Yes.
After all, more than half the world population lives in cities.
Yes. So we have realized that COVID has not only affected rural areas, and most discussions that you'll be here have been around the rural areas, but we should know that even the urban areas have been affected. In Brazil, we have had that there's been what they call increased property rates all of a sudden. So there are those people who do a lot of kitchen gardening in their homes, and they have been threatened because some of their leases are not renewed because, you know, the landlord is anticipating that in the next 6 months or so he will not be getting anything from there. So why they let you stay there? So we have seen those urban people affected also. We have seen transfers of rights being halted and of course done behind backs of many people as lockdowns take place. But all I have to say is that for countries that where vendors have to deliver foods in the markets, they are not having any incomes and they have resorted to many things. For example, in Brazil, we have had that there are gangs that attacking people because of need to actually feed their families, and the lockdowns are happening on them, and they have nothing to do but and you know, some countries have tried to counter that by putting out what they call curfews, but still we have had reports from different countries that even when there are curfews, and those countries that don't provide curfews, they're having such kind of violences in the city. So it's unsafe in most urban cities because of this situation. And I hope I've tried to answer you, Bruce. Yes.
Yeah. No, thank you very, very much for this this addition. I look back at Alke in terms of further solutions. You came up with your multi-stakeholder approach and proposed to have something on Brazil. What more do you see in terms of what we can do?
Let me stay in the field of animals. So I was thinking in my internal insight, so how can I contribute to finding solutions? Because I have a problem in the Netherlands in my multi-stakeholder setting. There are no companies participating. We barely have, we have some anticipation from the financial sector, but it's a lot you know, in the field of discussing, and discussing doesn't feed any mouth. So I was looking, and then the complexity of land issues is it's not only the food and agricultural or the food and nutrition agenda, it's also biodiversity. So I'm taking it back to Brazil. Biodiversity is climate, is the SDG. So we have 4 big international agendas that are hitting on land. Then we have the criminalization and the illegal cutting of the forest, the deforestation. It has a legal and it has an illegal component. We have a government that's really not functioning properly. It's a weak system. So the formal system is not working, and also the approach of kicking the straw dog is obviously not the right approach when you look at communication strategies. So it's a very complex situation, and actually we do know that there are a lot of Dutch actors that are involved from the infrastructural sector, from the soja. They are involved directly and indirectly, and they are financed also through Dutch banks. But the thing is that nobody can really discuss these items because of the complexity. We have in the whole distribution system and the due diligence discussions, we have difficulties because companies cannot always be held accountable because they cannot see below certain levels of their production chain. So basically what I've been doing, because of the complexity, I've developed a system whereby I take equality between 2 nations as a starting point. So I'm taking into this system, I'm taking both Brazil and I'm taking the Netherlands, but that's my mandate. And in there, I'm putting in the different layers that would be contributing. I call this the round table. It's taken from the Greek methodology, but it's also be found back in the saga or the legend of Arthur and his 12 kings. So I'm taking on my table, on the multiple stakeholder setting, I'm taking 12 knights. They are anonymous so that we can deal with the issue of trust, and we can deal with Chatham House rules. It's going to be a digital environment.
Could you kindly round off?
Round off, yes. So I'm looking forward for everybody to come up with ideas that are fit for purpose. I invite you to join us in the coming weeks for this. I will inform you. I hope that I get the contact details of all the participants. And if they are fit for purpose for Brazil specifically, and they are connected to Dutch players, and I'm also inviting companies, and I'm inviting the financial sector as well on the table.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then, no, wait, it's very important. We will bring these ideas that are fit for purpose, we will also take them through the system and then see what the costs are and calculate them on impact and viability so that we can actually create power through a practical mechanism. So I hope to see you back and I hope to hear from you. I'm very curious what comes out of this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I conclude basically, well, this first hour where we started, and that is with Chantal, and then specifically for a question that was raised on what basis your findings are, on what your findings are based. And so perhaps you can briefly explain, Chantal, the online survey that you conducted.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Guus.
Yeah,
I hope you can hear.
There were some questions about your voice, and so if you can use the camera.
I'll do my best, but give me a sign. Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. So together with a land dialogue, we have circulated, we called it a quick scan survey amongst our networks. And we've received some results, and those are basically on first observations and first impacts. And together with the land dialogue, we also hosted an online discussion for 4 days. So what I presented was basically the preliminary results of those. But of course, we as the broader land governance community need to gather data more systematically and over a longer period of time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this concludes the panel speaking. I'd like now to basically we already started turning the table and engaging with the questions from the audience. One question that was received is for Jimmy, and I think raises an important point that we didn't cover, namely youth. The question is, what is the impact of COVID-19 on rural youth and their relationship, their access to land in Uganda? Have you seen land sell off by rural people? Well, it's a related question, but youth in particular.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, the lockdown has locked everyone down and no work is done. So people have to look at other alternative means of how to generate income to be able to sustain themselves during this time. And one of the things that has fallen through is land. And you know that youth are very impatient in terms of when they want something, they really have to get it. So we have seen rampant land sales, especially on customary lands that are happening in rural areas of Uganda. And indeed, my colleague who has raised that point. It is happening in Uganda. And that's why the Ministry of Lands has had come up to try and mitigate that by saying any land transaction that is done during lockdown or during this COVID period will be invalid. Because reports were coming to the Ministry of Land that rampant land sales were taking place because people needed to survive. So indeed, it is true, they are happening, though the Ministry of Lands tried to mitigate that by putting up a statement against all transactions that happen on land. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
There is another question.
There is a question, I think, for Laura from Henry. As governments turn towards digital services and data, in view of the COVID-19 crisis, what would be the most affordable approach and technology through which the public, and in particularly poor people, can access services and information? Are there good practices that you could point at?
I think there is also another one. There is another one more specific from RISPER, referring to the community operated land information system. which he believes is a wonderful participatory approach. But however, in most of the global South countries like Kenya, this approach is being embraced slowly. What would be the best way to track this approach? I was inspired by a contribution from our online discussion, which I believe referred to a geographical area in South Africa, where the community and within the project, an NGO collaborated with the community in gathering data with norms where they were socially shared and agreed with the community. This was said the contributors. In the online discussion, I'm looking for him now. It was a successful story, which is not easy to find, these kind of successful stories. And I have the impression we should collect more and find a way to disseminate and learn from. What I'm saying is that we need to find a way to build up this trust and the collaboration, and so the multi-stakeholder approach is exactly the way to go. So, and I have the impression that digital platforms can play a role there, can be part of the solution, but it's not the panacea in the sense that there need to be a viable environment for this to happen. So the multi-stakeholder, the agreements and the participation is part of the game. And we need, in the situation of reduce of funding for land administration in the coming months, possibly these solutions can be less kind of a expensive and an affordable solution to explore further. Yeah. Sorry, I cannot bring many more cases because
No.
there would be a need for data collection efforts and possibly documenting. But some of these cases have been shared through the online discussions, and I'm sure there are more that is worth.
Yeah, perhaps you can add a link to the online discussion in the chat so that people can...
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Okay, then there was a question also to Alke. I'm not sure, Alke, whether you've seen that.
If you repeat it for me?
Sorry?
If you, can you repeat it for me or wrap it up, the question? Then I'll answer.
I will. Thanks you for your thought process. And you mentioned that the poor mostly do not feel listened to, a similar sentiment as we see now in the Black Lives Matter, and something that's shared by many disadvantaged groups. To find systemic solutions, do you think that baseline assessments on land matters for various system holders can be a clean starting point?
Well, to answer that, surely, I mean, an assessment, but an assessment, in my opinion, is a starting point. It's the same as a research or anything that's related to data gathering or information gathering or looking at the system from the outside will always contribute to making your argument. But the thing is that if you want to be heard, you have to speak to the right person. If I start to, let me take you to another animal. It's a rabbit. And it's now in the COVID fear. You know what a rabbit does when it's full? When it's full of fear, it's completely shutting down its system. It's ready for food. You can just take it and eat it, right? So I prefer to be a sniper. You see, if I'm hunting, I'm going straight for my target. That means that I gathered my information. We call this an actor analysis. It's power politics. You go for the actor that needs to change your situation. In land rights and in land governance, it's quite difficult because it's not only the fact that the rights are not formally, the rights of the common good are not formally well connected to the system. So that you have ICT, you have technology. I mean, basically the registration, let me take Bolivia again as an example. In Bolivia, the claims on land are 5 times, in some cases, there are 10,000 claims to land which are really not existing. Because there are 5 different institutes, and financial institutes here don't know the difference. So, for example, accountants will also register for a piece of land, and it's been registered 5 times because there is just total confusion about who has authority to give a piece of paper. You see, so all these things are really something that that's why I think we need this test case to see if we can make a sort of a practical solution in the multi-stakeholder setting, whereby everybody is not only heard, but it's also heard within the system of, although it's weak states sometimes formally, the informal connections that we can make together jointly by the people that we know and the people that we trust. I truly believe that we can make a difference, but we have to think strategically and be a sniper, you know, in order to regain back our strength. That's why I'm inviting you again, please join my movement, but it needs to be connected to the Dutch. It needs to have firm ideas, practical ideas that we can bring back and see whether we can make a change from within. So I hope to see you back, you know, I'm very curious. Yeah. Okay, sorry to take so much time.
No, it's fine. There was a question also for Jimmy. How can land use planning be instrumental, or are there other land-related instruments that can be applied for the sake of food security and food sufficiency in both urban and rural contexts?
Yes, in Uganda, our Ministry of Agriculture has tried to encourage people who stay in urban areas to do kitchen gardening to avoid going hungry, because sometimes the food is not reaching them. So agricultural practices like kitchen gardening, climate change, climate smart agriculture are deeply encouraged, and this can be some of the more ways you can do. Your land use can be managed, and results are gotten. And then, of course, as Oxfam, we have developed some instruments. These may not only work on urban areas, but we have developed some instrument that a large-scale land-based investment tool. This normally helps in land use planning when an investor is coming into an area and wants to do some kind of large-scale investment on the land. So the tool helps them manage, utilize the land right, and of course for their benefit and for the benefit of the people who have been probably displaced or people who live around here. But there are a number of instruments that can be used, like smart agriculture, kitchen gardening, and a number of others, yes. And then I would like to use this chance to answer the other question where someone talked about large-scale evictions that are happening. Yeah, I forgot to mention in my presentation that right now in Uganda, even when the lockdown was there and even after it's there, we are continuing to receive reports of massive evictions, even when the Ministry of Land has put up something, a guideline to stop that. We are seeing that happening in Kiriandongo district. I'm sure many of you have interacted with this issue. It is global, it has become a global issue, and we need to concert efforts to make sure that we curb this down. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I take here a question from Marleen van Ruiven, whom I remember as somebody working at the bank, but I understand now has joined the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Marleen. I'll take the question a bit broader and then in 2 steps. One is, there are reports of people re-migrating from cities to rural areas. So a question to the panel, whoever could take it up, is, did you observe that, and in what particular context? And then there's a follow-up question, but let's first do this first.
Can I go first?
Yes, you're still switched on. So.
Yes. So in Uganda and I think Kenya and Tanzania, not really so much in Tanzania, but in those 2 countries, 3 days before the government was to announce lockdowns, many people flocked the villages. They migrated to to villages. And even when the lockdown was lifted, the first thing that we realized in our country was that people were moving from urban areas to the villages, and there was an issue of transport and what. And so in Uganda and Kenya, we realized that people were running to villages, and of course, meaning that it was a bit of increased labor in the villages, but again, it also causes food insecurity in the villages, and also makes it impossible for food to move from the villages to urban areas, because of course people are already there and they're consuming the food. So that's something that we also realized, and we wanted to do some kind of study around there, but it was realized in Uganda and Kenya especially. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I think most examples actually are often quoted from South Asia, return migration. The follow-up question, and then for all panelists who feel inspired or informed, is this leading also to land issues? And the return of migrants in cities back to rural environments, is this creating land problems?
Definitely. So you realize that when people are in urban areas, sometimes they forget about some of the lands that they may have back there at home, probably lands that are inherited. So, but when they go back to the villages, you start looking for that land that you have, you need to use. So you begin causing violence, you begin causing instabilities, because you want back the land, or you realize that you need to use that land while you're in the village. So also those have been reported where people go back, and instead of staying in peace with others in the villages, they instead causing insecurities, because they're bringing out old cases about land wrangles, land disputes. So we have seen that also happen in different countries. Yeah, true.
Right, yes. And Frida, do you have some observations on this through the women's groups, perhaps?
Perhaps I have two comments. One is a personal experience that I experienced a week ago when I traveled 200 kilometers from Nairobi to check on something, and I actually did find that a family had occupied my land, and I was trying to do due diligence the African way. And I figured that this family thought, because we are all locked up in Nairobi and there is limited physical mobility, as landowners who are far off, this is the opportunity for them to attempt what we call adverse possession. So there are isolated cases of such thing, illegal occupation of private land. I don't know to what extent, but it could be rampant. Maybe it's an isolated case, but it's something to take note of. The other thing that I've seen, especially among the women population, is the impact of the cost of financing at this particular time of COVID, and how that is undermining investments in land. We run a cooperative, a savings and credit cooperative as Groups Kenya. But increasingly we get to hear complaints from the women that the bank are not issuing them loans, either to buy farm inputs, to develop their land in whatever way, or even to get their produce to the local market. And that means they're not able to invest the way they were investing. And of course, that's going to have a significant impact on food security, not now, but in the long run, and undermine the household development.
Okay, thank you. There is another question.
Can I add to this, please?
Yes, sure.
Actually, there has been a report in June just now that came out on it's on the website of Farm Land Grab, and actually it's coming from geodata gathering. Is that the investments in land are not really going down, and actually also sometimes I'm very surprised at the fact is that here in the Netherlands we still have fresh flowers coming from Africa. We still have fresh products coming from Africa. So basically all investments, the system is continuing, but people are going to the rural areas because they're afraid they don't have food in their own country, in their own cities. I've seen the same when I was in Zimbabwe. I lived there for 9 months, and it was in 1999. And it was just because it was just around the time that also the system was going like this. And then afterwards you had the white farmers that were taken out of the country, but it was all about land rights and ownership. And it was related to the civil war that was there for 15 years and the fact that there was no compensation coming from the UK. So I'm just thinking that, you know, maybe we need to look at the system itself and see whether we can find ways to strengthen ourselves and come up with practical solutions, coming back to my point. So I'll see you and meet you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Can I not respond, ask a question on that? I would imagine that most of the produce that arrive in the Netherlands are actually from large-scale investors, not the small-scale investor. So I hear what you say about the study, but I wonder whether it's really from the small-scale producers.
I don't think so.
I think that your small-scale producers, they have, so there's two ways that they either contribute to the system, which is through cooperatives, and then it's part of the exporting market and becomes part of the international market. If not, then it's a sort of a local system and maybe regional, but in Africa, I know that regional integration and regional trade is not the biggest. It's mostly either connected to the international system through the chains, or it's connected to local production for local small markets. If you have the local small markets, of course, when you have a movement coming from urban towards the local communities, you will have distress on the system, food system locally, because there is not a lot of production locally for local products because there's not a lot of money going around over there. Does that answer your question?
It's also maybe it's partly also a crop, Frida. I know for sure that, for instance, the French beans often are produced by smallholders, also for exports to Europe. But I don't think that's, for instance, the case for pineapples or something.
Yeah.
This brings us to a rather broad question, but perhaps you have some contribution there of what is the best choice for small farmers, cash crops or food crops in this context? Any recommendations and arguments? Well, you see this.
I see. Yeah. I think at this time, and Sahar Jallat from Palestine, lecturer, Birzeit University, and former project director for land administration projects in Palestine. For your question, I think what happened in Palestine now, it is more troops and disputes happen. And we noticed a lot of immigration from the urban area to the rural area, followed by a lot of disputes and conflicts. Because the people, as mentioned by some of our colleagues also, just remind that they inherited lands and they return back to find that it has been occupied by another people. And a lot of fights happen. In addition, the COVID-19 has a big implication on our lands, as there is around more than 120 areas undergoing under systematic land registration, what we call it settlement, which we had started since 2005. And because the work had been stopped and a lot of disputes had to start up between the villages. And now everything is not working, taking into consideration that the process in some places at startup or in the middle or at the end. So this is, I'm not sure now if the government had took any legal issues for such issue, but maybe it might be next week I will start to collect some information to write more about this case of the ongoing land systematic.
Okay, Sahar, you can, if you wish, put a link in the chat. But I would like to take the discussion back to today's subject, which is, of course, land rights in the context of COVID-19.
Yes.
Guus, are we now discussing the two different solutions that small-scale farmers will potentially have to decide whether they want to join the international market or whether they want to produce for the local market?
Was cash crops or subsistence or
yeah,
food?
but they have this choice. Is that the question or not? Whether they have this choice? Can they make this choice?
What is the question, as you could have seen, is what is the best option?
Yeah, but do they have this option? That's what I'm asking. Do they have this power to decide whether they want to join the international market or the local market? Is that the underlying analysis?
And to who do you address this question?
Yeah, because I don't understand. Do they have this choice? If I'm a small-scale farmer in Africa, do I have a choice whether I want to join the international market or the local market? Is that an option? I don't know, because I don't know the African context, but I want to ask this to Jimmy and maybe to the other panelists. Do they have this choice in Africa? Because that's the question, right? Or not? Or am I just misunderstanding? Because I just don't know. Is that the question or not?
No, the question was as I phrased it, and it is what is the best choice for farmers? Frida or Jimmy, do you have anything on this?
Can you ask that question again, please?
Please ask the question again. Do we have a choice?
The question was on what is the best choice for small farmers to make, to put efforts in cash crops or to concentrate on producing their food? Okay, Frida, can I go first?
Yes.
Yes, so looking at the pandemic right now, we and as I discussed earlier, the issue of hunger is growing. So I think for now we would concentrate on food crops because we want to live. We want people to survive the next phases of life. So for now, during this, but in response to what we are talking about, the COVID-19, I would advise farmers to concentrate on food crops, and then probably cash crops come in as things as improve. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, I'll return to you in a moment. I just want to mention that this also refers back to one of the keynotes on the opening day on Monday, in which the choice was indeed mooted of what actually the use is for small producers to venture into value chains. Yeah, but Frida, your turn.
For me, it is both, because there are other needs beyond the food. You know, people need to pay for education, health, and all that. So the investment both in food and cash crop is important, but the investment in cash crop will only make sense if farmers, you know, are respected within the value chain, but also they get value for their investment. I think the reason why they tend to concentrate more on the food crop is because of where we place them in the value chain.
I add to that because I think that's called a living wage, so that they are not in a new situation of slavery. And so that's why I posed my question in the first place. If they have the choice, then if they have a choice, that choice should be based actually on true value and true prices. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the local situation, but what I've seen and what I've heard is basically that mostly small-scale farmers are not really paid the value that they should get in order to, you know, contribute, have a fulfilling life.
Maria Spierenburg supports your question of, well, is there indeed such a thing as a choice? And I don't think that's a straightforward answer. With this, I would like actually to conclude this session. We have to make way for the next round, which are the 3 parallel sessions. Once again, those who would like to join the blockchain parallel session can stay in this channel, and the others have a choice between the 2 other parallel sessions which are linked in the chat box. Before we can really finish this session, I'd like to thank, in the first place, the panelists who gave us their thoughts and entertained the different questions. My thanks also to Neil on the background, who did the technical things and made sure that it happened. Now look at how the switching to the parallel sessions will proceed. And also to Chantal, who has moved ahead to one of the sessions for basically organizing the whole thing. So thank you very much for your interest. I do like to point you to the next 2 days. Well, first the parallel sessions that are still on the program for today, but also for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, Friday, when there are yet other sessions and parallel sessions on the broader issue of land governance. So thanks for your interest and your participation. Stay well, and yeah, there's just a few minutes to stay alive. Perhaps drink or something. The different parallel sessions. Thanks again. Bye bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Angie. Bye. Love you. Bye.
Good morning, Ben.
Hi, John. How you doing? Joe?
Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure, as always. Just getting some, honestly, it's water, you know. So.
Hello, everybody. Waiting for to join us.
Hey, John.
Good morning, Shami.
Hi, Shami.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Yeah, okay, I think.
Well, we'll wait a minute or two for our other two panelists, Joe Brakers from the Netherlands. And
I'm here.
Joe is here. Thank you, Joe. Good morning.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. See you.
Good morning to you. Yes.
And we're just waiting for Nura Jibo from Nigeria, who is our fourth panelist.
Yep.
Found it a fairly lively session, that last one towards the end. There's a bit of friction in the conversations.
A lot of food for thought, yes. Unintended, but.
No, absolutely. No. It's,
Well, I think we shall get started. Hopefully Nura Jibo will be joining us shortly. First of all, I should say good afternoon, good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. We have participants from around the world. My name is John D. Markunis, and I'll be the moderator of this session. A little bit about me. I have a little company called Power of Change Consultancy, domiciled here in the United States, and we provide business development services and advisory services, blockchain, that is, specifically to the real estate industry with a special focus on global land registries. I first like to thank LANDac International for allowing us to arrange this panel and have this discussion, and also the Land Portal Foundation. Neil, thank you very much for your support, and Chantal. This session was organized by two key global strategic organizations. One is the Government Blockchain Association, GBA, which is based in Washington, D.C. It's a nonprofit dedicated to blockchain education and implementation for governments around the world. The second is a group called, an organization, nonprofit again, called the Foundation for International Blockchain and Real Estate Expertise, The acronym is FIBRE. And those two organizations are global strategic collaborators with blockchain. FIBRE is dedicated to 100% blockchain and other ITs for the real estate industry on a global basis. This roundtable format is going to be quite interesting, I think, and educational. I'm going to introduce the panelists first, and then we're going to circle back to it to provide you all with a class, a course, a blockchain course, a 5-minute course on what blockchain fundamentals. We can spend weeks on talking about blockchain and what it is, but we're going to spend a few minutes to establish a baseline for everyone who's listening so that we can understand how it works. And when we get into the conversations and discussions and questions on blockchain and climate change and land use, we'll have a better, I think, grasp for it. And certainly all of us on the panel, myself, encourage questions as well. It's interesting, according to the 2018 UN climate report, the world only has about 12 years left to reduce carbon emissions and avoid the worst impacts of climate change affecting everything, affecting the planet. Low-level scenario projections indicate that the frequency, depth, and extent of both high tide and more severe coastal flooding will increase rapidly in the next 10 years. What does this mean? This means perhaps, likely, this might destroy or make unsuitable for use billions of dollars worth of land, raw land and property by the middle of the century. And there will be 13 million people potentially at risk of needing to migrate, forced migration, due to a sea level rise of only 6 inches by the end of the century. This is quite dramatic and a cause for concern. If we don't reduce carbon emissions by 2030, where I'm sitting here on the island of Manhattan in the city of New York, I'd be under 18 feet of water due to coastal flooding. And so it's extremely important that we try and understand how we can mitigate it with blockchain, especially as it relates to land use, land administration, property ownership, zoning, construction, valuation, agriculture, and even global investing, commercial real estate investing by the big guys with the big money, because they are also being impacted by climate change and their decision-making on where to spend their money, where to invest. So with that, I'd like to start by introducing the panelists, and then we'll jump into Blockchain 101. First up is Ben Elder. I met Ben Elder in 2018. Welcome, Ben. Ben is the Global Director of Valuations at the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. I call it RICS. Some people call it other things. It's RICS for me. And he's zooming in from London, United Kingdom. And Ben is a specialist in global valuations and is part of a world where they're trying to standardize valuations around the globe. And he does quite a bit of traveling for that. So his input is going to be extremely interesting in terms of how global valuations are changing due to climate change. And perhaps we can talk about the shift in global commercial real estate investing. Next, Shami Akimana. Welcome, Shami. He's the CEO of Convergence Tech, which is it's actually a digital company. They focus on digital transformation, digital identity, supply chain, climate change, and blockchain. Quite a few things. Shami's going to share with us some very interesting use cases and things that Convergence Tech is involved with, involving blockchain, climate change, and evolving land uses. And Shami's zooming in from Toronto, Canada. Next up is my colleague from FIBRE, Joe Bronkers. Welcome, Joe. He's the co-founder and board director of FIBRE, and he consults in the areas of blockchain, finance, and real estate. He has quite an extensive background with institutional real estate investors and real estate lending in the Netherlands. Joe's working on some extremely interesting initiatives involving blockchain, the built real estate sector, including construction and the environment, and the use of data which is key to, I think, how blockchain can be effective. So while we're waiting for Noura, who hopefully will be with us shortly, why don't we just jump into the blockchain course? We'll spend a few minutes on that.
Noura has arrived, John.
Excuse me?
Yeah, he's in.
He's in. Okay, perfect. Noura, are you in? Are you with us at the intersection?
You're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Yeah.
The little blue button in the top right-hand corner.
Yeah, hello, sir. Could you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I am on already. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you for joining us. We're just getting through the introductions. Perfect timing. I'd like to introduce Noura Joby. Noura Joby is a chartered quantity surveyor. He's also a member of RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. And I had to ask him what a chartered surveyor does. And as I understand it, it relates to the measurement and evaluation of costs in parts of construction projects. Interesting enough and really quite good for us is he's the founder of the African Climate Change Research Center and the UN focal person for climate change for the last 10 years. So we're going to learn quite a bit about what's going on. Noura's zooming in from us from the northern state of Jigawa in northern Nigeria. And he's going to be describing some complex scenarios of climate change and changing land use and land registries due to climate change and weather aberrations, which has created some complex scenarios in Nigeria. So Noura, welcome very much to the program, to the panel.
Many thanks, sir. Many thanks, sir. I highly appreciate. Good to see you.
We're going to jump into Blockchain 101. And so I'm going to ask Joe Bronkers first. What is blockchain? How does it work?
Yeah. Well, my simplest, most simple explanation is blockchain is a technical means if we are going to exchange information on a digital way between several parties, stakeholders, which have different interests. And then we can use blockchain to add value. And what we can do with blockchain, create digital fingerprints, create timestamps, so that we can be sure that the information we had in a certain time frame, that this can be proved on a later stage that exactly this information was already there. And then everybody that is involved in the network, they can look back if they have the time frame, the timestamp or the fingerprint. They can check the information that they received, that this is exactly the same as initially developed. So the simplest explanation, add digital trust to information.
Noura, what does blockchain mean to you? What's your understanding of it? How would you define it for us here?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I think based on my own scale of preference, blockchain could be defined as a system of information. It's a system of recorded information that is very difficult to be tampered or to be hacked by everybody that is interested in doing that. That is a simple and the down-to-earth definition of blockchain. Let me come again. A blockchain is a system of recorded information that is difficult for everybody to hack or to change that system. That is the literal and simplest definition of blockchain.
Thank you. Well, we need to keep it simple because it's such a complex technology.
Yeah,
okay.
for example, yeah, if we are relating it to technology, let me just pick a simple example of Bitcoin transaction, where it's a peer-to-peer online transaction that is always used by its end users or the people that believes in it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Ben, how do you look at blockchain? How would you define it for us?
Thanks, John, and hi, everybody. I'm a pretty simple guy, and it's called blockchain. So to me, it's a chain of blocks which are actually joined together, a set of data, a set of information, which actually butt up to each other and becomes more meaningful as a whole. Joe and Nuru already touched on the issues about tamper-free and date stamping, and that certainty which starts to remove some of the risk which is involved in more traditional means of storing and accessing information. If you think about lots of the legal cases that are prevalent, they're always around information and understanding at particular points, and lots of court cases revolve around the professionalism of the individual and making judgments, and blockchain gives an opportunity to record all those processes in one place, which then can influence the allocation of scarce resources in a better way.
That's well said, very well said. And last but not least, Shami, you have a company that's devoted to blockchain and other technologies, I would assume. Digitization is big on your list. How would you describe it for us and how it works?
Sure. Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. So I would say basically it's a new form of data store that creates tamper-proof and highly resilient data, which can be used to automate transactions and create a high level of digital integrity. So in the case of land registries, you could take advantage of many of the features that blockchain offers, and that this is very regional and country specific. So in countries where you have a fraud problem or corruption problem, the immutable records of the assets, the owners, the timestamps certainly help create fraud-resistant systems. Whereas in countries where you don't have these issues, you could, having a single source of truth that can be shared across multiple trusted stakeholders would ensure a very smooth buying and selling process. I guess that's how I would put it.
Yeah, it's all about information and data, which is immutable, can't be changed on the chain, if you will, on blockchain. Like you mentioned, it's time-stamped. You know when the information came in. It's all connected, and you can't go back and change it. That's the immutability, and that's the power of it as well. So I think that's it. I think it will figure in very much to climate change as it relates to land registries and land governance and land administration. In the previous session, Laura Medulato from the Land Portal Foundation mentioned something that extremely important and simple. Information is power, and there must be trust and community participation. I take that a step further and say shared information is more powerful.
Yeah.
With community participation. And I think that blockchain will provide that trust. It'll provide participation. As long as it's a public access blockchain, which we might talk about a little bit later. Shami, you might want to talk about that when we come to your discussion on what you're doing. So let's get back to Ben. Then why don't you tell us a little about what you're doing in terms of your work, your evaluation work, and some of the challenges you're having and where technology can perhaps help out.
Sure. Thanks, John. I think it's quite interesting just picking up on that last bit of the discussion there, around information. And it's really important to understand that information is not necessarily knowledge. It's a source of data or information. We still need the professionals and other people to interpret that information and make it valuable. But it does make it more accessible. My area is valuation, particularly in real estate valuation. My interest is where the economy meets real estate and the interaction of those processes. And real estate's always been a traditional adversarial process between landlord and tenant for many years. But that's all changing, and COVID sort of rapidly changed the landscape beyond recognition. And all parties in transactions now are looking at different risks to the ones that they were measuring a few weeks ago. And there's this attempt to try to find new solutions, and that comes from data. And particularly the large investors are looking for a more transparent, consistent set of data to support professional decisions around valuation. I see blockchain as a really key element of creating what I call building passports, to be able to develop a set of information which captures details both about the real estate, but the land and whatever other subdivisions occur within the piece of real estate. And investors are looking for more detail regarding the segmentation of value. It used to be that a valuation was a sort of whole number, and it was used either for secured lending or for regulatory purposes, financial reporting. But now investors are starting to say which bit of that valuation is attributed to its sustainability characteristics, its climate resilience. And we as professionals and valuers need to be able to access that type of data consistently to support the decisions that we're making. So I see blockchain as a two-way thing. It provides information one way, but it also standardizes the collection of data. Otherwise, the blocks don't fit together. So it becomes more imperative to collect and store the data in a consistent way. And then if we expect blockchains to talk to each other rather than on a linear process, again, there are standardizations around those processes. And that's what I do for most of my life, is to try and create international standards in the valuation space, so that the numbers which are generated, which decision makers use, both government and private companies use to make their decisions, are consistent, because that leads to better use of the scarce resources that we have in this world, and help to deliver political aims as well as economics.
Well,
I'll hold there.
Yeah, well, you led up to an interesting point about the investors. I mean, there's a lot of big money floating around this world, the institutional investors, and they're part of the scenario. That, you know, they're part of the planet, and they're part of they're impacted by climate change. Have you seen any shifts yet in terms of where these, well, institutional investors, but other smaller investors as well? Is there any shift yet in their thinking, their strategic?
Yes. Yeah, very much so. I mean, the very many of the funds now have social development goals, SDGs, written into their requirements. I'll be quite honest. I think there is some judgment about how those are met and measured, but certainly many of the big investors are now have that corporate social responsibility statements in their armory, in their portfolio. But the challenge is actually how to demonstrate it. How do you really show that the supply chain that you use is actually meeting the social responsibilities that you make in your statements? And part of that is around public perception. And we've seen some fairly obvious cases of big companies being affected by instant social media, which has directly affected their share price or their trading price. I think one of the big challenges is still that the prevalence of oil within the system still dominates the status quo, and we've got to find a way out of that if we're really going to impact on climate change. And I think blockchain helps with that process because it makes those elements easier to identify and more difficult to hide, particularly in developing nations where that information may be a bit more opaque than in some other areas.
Certainly, the data has to be public, but public access for the stakeholders. Yeah, data, open data, big data. That for me is key for climate change. It's access to climate change data information. So Joe Bronkers is working on some interesting initiatives that revolve around information and data in the built environment, which relates back to the environment. So Joe, why don't you tell a little about what you've been doing and your thoughts on using blockchain for your work?
Yes. Well, my background was in real estate investment and in banks, and all those organizations, they're in the middle of lots of data flows. So I learned how easy or how difficult it was to get the right data in the moment that you like to have it. We're all investing in real estate. Everybody in the world that tries to invest, if you buy your own home, it's one of the major investments you do in your life. But what do you actually know about the building? That's very strange. If you buy a second-hand car, you can go to the garage and they have the maintenance history stored in their computer. They can tell you every single detail. But if you buy a home, it is difficult to find out when the last time the wood has been painted, for example. And because everybody is holding a piece of the puzzle of information about this property. The installation guy, they know what type of heating or cooling installations are there, what is the maintenance history for that. The designer, the architect, and the municipality, they know what the design was, how it was permitted. Maybe the bank, they know what they finance, and everybody is holding a little piece of the puzzle. And the difficulty that we saw in the Netherlands, but which is everywhere in the world the same, is a big issue. If you want to have the entire set of information, this is very difficult to bring it together. And the reason why, because everybody that is using the information for its own purpose, they're using their own way of identifying the building. If I'm an investor, I maybe have the address that I use for the ID of the building. But if I'm a carpenter, I have to focus on the woodwork in the building. I have a number for the job in my administration. And if I want to have this history together of the building all together, it's very difficult to combine all these pieces of information because everybody is identifying in a different way. Well, we saw this. And then we wanted to look, how can we have create more value with applying new technologies like blockchain in a network of information exchange? Well, one of the key components to achieve that is to come to a global, a universal way of identifying buildings. And what we developed, that is what we are working on. We are working on what we call a unique object identifier. This is a system, a concept that respects all the ways how we identify at the moment, but puts in between all these identifiers a universal way of identifying. And this can be applied on every detailed level. And we create per building a kind of a taxonomy. We say, if this is the ID of the building, the woodwork of this carpenter can have a different ID, but this ID is linked to the mother ID of the building. Then we create a kind of taxonomy underneath this mother ID. And if we can store this mother ID, then we know that somewhere there is information available. If we know where the information is, we get access to it. And if we have gotten access to all the information, then we know that we have the complete set. The puzzle is complete then. And I think this is a major infrastructure component that we can develop to get better holistic overview of what we know about the building. And why is this important? It is important, I think, if we look back after 100 years to this era, I think there are two major changes. One is that every industry got digitized, Industry 4.0. I think everybody understands this. It is also causing that we see less primary industries and more third industries, so the service industries. We see the urbanization. It's a mega trend that is impacting the way how we live and how we organize our land use. And the second big thing that I see of this era is for the first time, we had serious attention to the climate impact of the way how we build. We didn't in the real estate world have this attention before. And we noticed that this is a complex global issue. And we are starting to create data to supervise and to have better understanding about it. And I think if we manage to create this unique object identifier first as an international infrastructure component, before we start producing, developing all these products that provide us with all these different data, more than we already have, we have this infrastructure ready, then it helps us to keep the overview and make it more simple to have the right data on the right moment that I want to use it. And that's what we try to develop now.
Yeah, Joe, your unique object identifier, UOI, it's a software, correct? It will be a software type of solution.
Yeah, we see it.
Not blockchain per se, right? But it can run on blockchain. Could it?
Exactly. I think blockchain is helping us to create a digital solution between end and end users. Right. But because we have so many stakeholders in the real estate processes, which are all our end users, if we cannot connect and combine the information, blockchain doesn't have real value. That it's having less value than if we have a network where everybody can participate.
Yeah, like Ben said, I mean, it has to, this information and data has to be available or to the right players and the stakeholders. That's extremely interesting.
And what I think, because we're entering a situation where we have more complex issues about how we are going to use the land, because we have this globalization, we have this climate change, we have a shortage of resources. So we need to choose very keen what location will be used for what, and how can we use and reuse the materials, because there will be a shortage. I think data is very key to give us, create answers and create smart solutions to solve these issues that we're facing, the challenges that we have.
Joe, I have a quick question for you. If you give me a quick answer, there's data and big data. Is there any difference? I hear that big data all the time now.
Yeah, well, in my understanding, everybody wants to have data. And you have a forest of big data. I think nobody wants to have more data. I think everybody wants to have less data, but the right data on the moment that you need them. So in the big data realm, you like to have the right data. I think if we can manage to come there, that will be a great achievement.
Yeah, having the right data is key. I mean, that's key for Ben's work. Listen, we're up on the 30-minute mark. I just point that out because we have 60 minutes. And I understand that this session will close automatically at 60 minutes. And hopefully I'll have a minute left to close the session. But anyway, Chami Akimana, you're up there in Toronto, but you're doing some work in far and distant places, including blockchain, but other technologies maybe for your digitization work. Tell us what you're doing and how it relates to climate change and blockchain and some of those other things.
Sure, thanks, John. So yeah, so we position ourselves as a digital transformation company, and we use blockchain as one of the tool sets for a couple of different applications, one being traceability. So land registries type of applications fall into the traceability division. And then we also focus on identity, which is a fundamental piece that needs to be solved as well. We do have a unique climate change team that sits separately, that consults with all of the teams. And why digitization? Because we find in a lot of the instances, including countries, including the developed world, before we roll out any application, we do need to look at some form of digitization or digital transformation. So we do a fairly comprehensive scoping exercise or a discovery exercise. And depending on the needs, we would also do a very comprehensive business readiness, because we find that we need to do these first. As you know, or may not know, 84 to 86% digital transformation fails due to due to people and culture, lack of governance frameworks and things like that. So we find we need to do all of these first before we launch any blockchain type of application. When we do go down that path, I mean, some of the examples I could speak to during the conversation are, we've developed a land registry in Haryana with the government of India. We have an ongoing project in Mongolia where we're tracking Kashmir. A big component of that is the traceability of Kashmir, but due to bad herding practices, the earth is severely degraded and about 70% of the land is almost unusable. due to bad herding practices. So how would our technology enable better interventions and prescribe better herding practices, etc.? We also have a similar project in countries like Ecuador, Peru. So I can dive into certain examples or depending on that. Our guiding light has been very much programs like the RED+, ESG. So these are the big goals that we're kind of thriving for to achieve, so that through the projects, through the work that we do, we could play a significant role in changing how we think and how some of these processes are changed, so that we could look at these big programs like RED+, which is a reduction of carbon emissions due to deforestation, and ESG, which is a significant metric, if you like, that could measure some of the corporate governance frameworks. That's how we come about with this.
Okay, thank you very much. Last but not least, in terms of our panelists, our expert panelists, Nura Jibo from
yes.
You have quite an interesting scenario that has developed in Nigeria and it's developing, and share with us some of the things that are going on in terms of climate change and weather aberrations. And I think Nigeria as other countries do have issues with human migration, forced human migration, and due to different issues. And give us a taste of what's going on and perhaps how blockchain might be able to help, or maybe not.
Good afternoon, all. Once again, I think you've raised a very fundamental and interesting question. My own work and my own interest has to do with application of blockchain to climate change scenarios. For instance, the application of blockchain to climate change, especially climate change adaptation. I work on desertification and deforestation issues in northern Nigeria. 75% to 80% of the lands in northern Nigeria have been degraded by climate change, poverty, and other groveling absurdities. So what we are doing now is to see, based on the work that we do, that is 3G programs, which we call Going Green at Grassroots, where we engage primary and secondary school students in tree planting. We have been doing this tree planting for well over 10 years now, where we planted about 1 million trees or thereabout in the northeast and northwestern Nigeria. So we are trying to see how we could use blockchain in mapping out the the data of the trees that we have planted, so that we could exactly get the number of trees planted, the number of trees that survive, the number of trees that died. So based on this, I think it is very important for the audience and all the participants of this conference to note that blockchain could perfectly be used to map out the climate data, especially its application to degraded lands in northern Nigeria, especially the northeast and northeastern and northwestern Nigeria, where Boko Haram and poverty have ravaged that area in terms of climate aberration. The second area of interest that I have is application of blockchain technology to the built environment. That is to how to create synergy or to integrate data, to integrate building information modeling with blockchain technology. And this is really going to be an interesting area to explore. And the third interest that I have is the application of blockchain and its importance to land registration and land tenure system, and see how it could influence policies, especially government policies in Nigeria. So these are some of the things that I do and I picked interest. And coming back to your question, Mr. John, I think for now, because of the climate change impact, negative impact in northern Nigeria, especially in the northeastern Nigeria, a lot of many people have left their lands unattended to because of insecurity. And there is also another issue of farmers' hardest conflict that made a lot of people to abandon their lands. They can no longer go back and farm their lands because of the harsh condition, one, and because of insecurity. we are in a situation whereby today in northwest and northeastern Nigeria, the temperature rise is about 50 to 45 degrees. So, and geographically, once you have this harsh condition, is definitely going to be unbearable. So, now let me come back again to the application of blockchain to climate change scenarios, especially the complex scenario. We can use blockchain to engage the United Nations in terms of Paris Agreement, where we could, with the Paris Agreement that was ratified in 2015, 196 countries have signed it, they have ratified it. Now we are trying to measure each country's performance based on what we call INDCs, intended nationally determined contributions. So blockchain could be used to really monitor each country's performance in terms of reducing carbon emission. And it could be used to track greenhouse gases so as not to allow duplication of activity. Blockchain could also be used to make transactions in terms of clean development mechanism, that is in terms of climate clean development mechanism, and then carbon technology. So these are some of the things that I would want to share with this honorable panel and the great participants of this international online conference, Mr. John.
Thank you very much, Noor. It has to be emphasized, though, that in terms of talking about blockchain and land registries, a lot of the world, many countries in the world or regions are still paper-based if they have a system. Many countries don't even have a land registry system. And Shami, I want to ask you about this. Before you can have a blockchain system in place, you have to be digitized, right? Can you kind of touch on that, especially with your experience in India? Because many people don't realize the paper documents, if there are any, they need to be digitized first to be uploaded to the blockchain infrastructure. Have you come across those issues?
Absolutely, John. So we were quite lucky with the state that we worked with in Haryana was about 90% digitized. So we didn't have to go through a lot of the digitization process. But currently we're finalizing a pilot with another country in Asia where a significant part of that is digitization. So very scattered different groups that actually collected data in different computing systems. There's no centralized function as such. So a huge significant portion of what we do was basic IT infrastructure. So helping enable basic IT governance, IT frameworks, IT infrastructure. And then the blockchain project took many, many months before we went down that path. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the digitization part needs to be considered. And then, of course, things like access to internet. I mean, these are fundamental problems that need to be addressed as part of the discovery and scoping, before you embark on one of these journeys. Because one of the things that you also do need to look at and identify is the business process. Because if you're used to, if you're using a torrent system or similar type of system, you need to unify that to an actual business strategy from a government perspective. So you need this to tie into your government strategy or economic development plans, etc. I mean, the country that we're working with currently, their Minister of Economic Development claims the lack of conclusive ownership of land titling is the single biggest inhibitor to their economic growth, because people have no idea if they own their land. Corporations would grab their land, deforestation occurs, etc., etc. So the first fundamental is identifying what that strategy looks like, tie that to your readiness, and then so on and so forth is what I would say.
Yeah, and have you come across any obstacles as you're from governments, the governments you talk to, or the land registries? Do you get much resistance to blockchain? Is there sort of a challenge to get the idea through to them that blockchain can help?
Yeah, we try not to use the terminology blockchain as well. I think very early on we used to refer to it as blockchain technology. We've purposefully steered away from it. It's no different to using any other technology. And depending on the country, of course, I mean, we've done projects in Afghanistan as well where you don't want traceability, you don't want transparency. So what you're doing is something very different to what the full features of blockchain and its capabilities. So certainly the pushback is the lack of education, there's also so much overhype and total skepticism that one needs to deal with. So bringing that to a real normal situation certainly helps, we find, bringing them along the journey. We do conduct education sessions to kind of warm the government folks, to put them at ease as well.
Yeah, it seems to be all revolved around data. And my thesis, and I'm writing a paper on this, is that data aggregation and collection analysis key. And I think that data comes from two sources. It comes from the climate change corporations or associations or organizations that collect data. And it's quite disparate. They're all collecting data in silos and not sharing it. And certainly blockchain can help. And I think that information can also be collected from the land registries themselves, who have information and data on the land, and combine the two sources of information. I'd like to point out a comment that someone made here, and I'll read it. And this is from Elke, I believe that's how I pronounce it, from the Netherlands. And she says that we're talking about end users and outcomes, where blockchain or climate and rising sea levels is such a turbulent and unpredictable situation. You cannot predict too much in the future. You have to create solutions related to the present for this. And I think really what she's saying, and quite transparently, is that the data that's collected from current climate change information from these different sources, it probably changes dramatically from week to week, maybe, or from month to month, or year to year. But I think that land administration officials need to look at the trends in order to create new policies and implement new policies for land and land use and land tenure. It's funny, but related to that, Frida from Kenya in the last session, the opening session, mentioned that in Kenya, the land administration people are making changing or bringing up new policies and regulations because of COVID. And I think that land governance officials can also create new policies and implement them with climate change information as well. Joe, do you have any thoughts on blockchain use for land registries in terms of the data that needs to be collected to help land administration officials make the right choices?
Yeah, maybe I'd like to bring to the table two examples that I like really very much. One is a pilot that is going to be started in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we have the difficulty that if there is an administration, it is not kept properly. So if you own a plot of land, it is difficult to prove that it's yours. And also the current situation in Afghanistan is such that there's a lot of fraud, and maybe you can go to a notary and to a municipality, but actually, if they prove that you own this land, it is not accepted by everybody, because not everybody is trusting the system. Well, here there's a pilot going on together with the United Nations that we create different levels of trust. If not alone the municipality or notary, but also some supervisory bodies that look to the situation of Afghanistan. If they simultaneously provide you with a stamp of trust on the document, a digital trust stamp, then this is giving the level of trust that outsiders are looking to, and it enables the owner, the proprietary of the land, to attract investments. I think this is a very easy and understandable. The other one, and I like that even more, is in South Africa. We have the areas, the slums in Johannesburg. People own the how do you call it, the iron sheds, and actually this is not a high quality type of building, but they don't have the money to invest. If they could attract investments, then they could invest it in their home, but they don't earn a lot of money. And here there's a startup that says, okay, maybe the registration of the land is not done well at the moment, but if you can prove that you have, for example, neighbors that prove that you own the land, if there's a municipality that proves that you own the land, if you can maybe show a utility bill, if it is there, that proves that you're the one owning the land, then we organize for you that we invest in this building. You cannot attract the investment if you go to a bank for a loan, but then the investors, the developers of this blockchain solution, they bring in money and they say, we invest not alone in building a home for yourself, but on top of this, we build 2 additional layers, which you can rent out. And then with the incomes that you get from the rent, you pay off the investment that there was. And after you paid off it entirely, then you can still continue renting these 2 stores in the future. So when you are how you pensionate, if you're elder, you do not have labor anymore, no income, then you can still continue to rent out these apartments, and it creates a means for income in your elderly days. And I think there's a very, very charming way how actually blockchain helps you to attract investment and build a property with which you can create income and for the rest of your life.
Perfect. Here's a question that I think is basic, and I'll shorten it, but it's fundamental. What mechanisms are there within the blockchain platforms to ensure security in the land registration process, given that titling to land requires maximum levels of security and processes must be fraud-proof? It goes on to say from Hazel, The Guardian on May 14, 2011 reported that Britain's land registry suffered a £26 million loss in compensating victims of title theft. How secure is the paperless system of land registration, especially in context of developing nations? Well, I'll tell you what, I think the security of paperless systems is on a scale of 1 to 10, a 1. But so I'll throw out the question to perhaps Jami or Joe, what mechanisms are there in place with blockchain to ensure the maximum security that the land and title registration needs?
Jami, you first. You're muted.
Thanks. Technology is simply one small component of it, and we find, so even when we did the project in India, there were still lands that were disputed. So there's a lot of things that need to happen in the periphery. So lands that are disputed. In India, the system that we worked on was a presumptive ownership of land title. So you assume by having this land title, you own this building or apartment or land, whereas this could be in dispute with many other folks. So the technology component, if implemented properly, would secure a very tamper-proof documentation and a proof of records and a provenance of those records. But the inputting of data needs to be done very, very correctly. So if you're still being able to bribe an officer internally, or if you still have access to internal folks that could bribe and change records, you're not changing much in the system. You've just got a conclusive a stamp proof that you now own a land title when it actually doesn't belong to you. So these things need to be checked and balanced properly. So things like user control access to your admin. There needs to be a secure wall built around your access controls. So IAM, which is your identity access management. There are various tools that need to be implemented in conjunction with the land registry titling systems, is what I see.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, do you want to add anything to that real quick? Oh, by the way, we have 9 minutes left, so we can entertain a few more thoughts and questions. Joe, go ahead if you have a comment.
I think creating trust, that's what blockchain does. And if we have trust, we need trust. Now we are used to have it on paper with a stamp, but we can change it to digital, having digital information. And I think creating a proof of ownership, we can achieve this, and it's depending on how much proof that you need. We can achieve this by creating different layers on top of each other. And I think that's very interesting, because proving that you own an asset can be organized in different ways, depending on how much trust there is in the system or how much trust should be there. I think it's depending on the local situation.
Yeah, Can I come in there? Oh, sorry, it's Ben speaking. I think also you need to look at what else is wrapped around it. This conversation seems to be focused just on blockchain, but if we actually think about the insurance industry, which wraps around all these issues, it's the same for paper or whatever. But I mean, if you think about the use of credit cards, we're moving to a cashless society driven by COVID. But why are we happy to use a credit card? Somebody taking money out of our account before we've got goods which have been delivered, all those trust issues. It's because of the system that backs it up that there are insurance policies, refunds, etc. And if you put those round the blockchain, that starts to create a much more trustworthy system. So I don't see it as just one item. I see it as an ecosystem that is that needs to be developed and maintained to retain, develop the trust of all parties who use it.
You know, that's interesting.
And
go ahead.
And again, in terms of trust, I think the key thing there is that blockchain, everybody should understand, is a kind of system where if you don't have that trust, you can't be part of it. For instance, in India, we have witnessed more than 200 land frauds. And in Nigeria, we have a lot of frauds that is going on in terms of land registration. Nigeria has a policy, that is the Land Use Act of 1978, where each and everybody that is interested in buying land or in hiring or in leasing, he has to get it from the government. Nobody should own a land in Nigeria except the government. And this policy has been there since 1978. And the way registration is going on under the federal and state ministries of lands is just a paperwork or a kind of analog or traditional method of registration of lands. So we are trying to see how we could use blockchain to influence Nigeria's government policy, to embrace it so that it could minimize land fraud in terms of land registration. It's just simple for each and every landowner to get a surveyor to survey the land, get the coordinates, and then we put it on the blockchain. And that would make it 100% perfectly secure. And I think this is what I would want to add, Mr. John.
Thank you very much. Funny, I've talked to people in Nigeria and I've seen photographs of, speaking of fraud, there are signs up on buildings and homes saying, this home is not for sale. Because of the ongoing falsification of, I guess, of deeds.
Of documents, yes, exactly. Actually, what we have, there are two things there in terms of land registration in Nigeria. The government issue gazette, it gazetted lands to communities. A land that is gazetted to communities, that one, the community has the prerogative power to use it. And then there is certificate of occupancy, which is commonly called C of O. Every landowner or every property owner must produce certificate of occupancy. But these two things have been the two process of registering lands in Nigeria have been filtrated or infiltrated by a lot of fraud. People use it to make all sorts of 419 activities or advance fee fraud in terms of land registration. So the surest way to arrest it is to embrace blockchain as a solution to land registration and tenure system in Nigeria.
Thank you, Nora. We have 4 minutes left, maybe. I'm going to ask each of you to take 30 to 45 seconds, or maybe.
Well, we are now focusing on land registry. I think if you approach real estate from climate change, I think if everybody can take notice that 60% of all the asset investments in the world go in real estate. 50% of all the raw materials used in the world go into buildings, built structures. 40% of all the CO2 emission, greenhouse gas emissions, come from construction works or from the usage from real estate. And 30 to 20% of all the traffic flows on railroad and water are somehow related to construction works or the maintenance of buildings. If we take this in consideration, and if we know that we are getting in a world with more shortage of materials, with more urbanization, with more growth of cities. I think we need to look to new and other solutions where we combine all these process flows with materials, with investments, with land use, with greenhouse gas emissions, to come with solutions that we didn't have before. I think there's only one way forward, to come with new solutions. And I think we can only achieve this by better using the data that we can make and develop.
Ben, 60 seconds for a concluding remark.
Sure, yeah, the first ever 60 seconds. I think that the opportunity of creating new ways of occupying and owning buildings is really immense. The process of data, which will allow us to have short-term occupations. We've seen it through Airbnb. We've seen it through lots of other areas of data and technology. Well, let's employ that to deliver what's necessary rather than what is the status quo. The challenge that we've got is that, particularly in Europe, we've got a massive stock of old buildings which need retrofitting to save the carbon. Let's not build the next set of buildings that in 50 or 100 years or less will need retrofitting again. Let's really look at the data and let's get this blockchain in place so that we can have flexible use of the raw materials in various different ways.
Shami, did I ask you yet? How about concluding remark?
Yeah. Three things, John. A word of caution, make sure you do your due diligence on your vendors, on the blockchain that you're looking at implementing. And unfortunately, there are quite a few very useless blockchains out there, blockchain systems. So make sure you understand what technology you're using. Do a lot of due diligence on that. Once you've done that and you are embarking on your journey, make sure you do a very thorough discovery, process mapping, really understand how business process changes with the implementation of technology. And third, certainly interoperability is key when you look at technology, but also change in regulation. I mean, with every jurisdiction we work with, we try and engage red tape reduction or policy groups within the ministries, or we help set these groups up, because if regulation doesn't change, you've built closed systems that cannot interoperate, and you have various problems with that. So those are the three: caution, real thorough understanding of discovery and process mapping, and then work with your regulators to make sure you guide them all through this journey. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time as well.
Nura, we only have 30 seconds left, but give us.
Yeah, I think my last words: the use of blockchain technology, disruptive technology such as blockchain, is inevitable, is unavoidable. So I am trying to urge everybody to embrace it, because it solves a lot of fraud issues. It is efficient, it is cost effective, and the use of it is definitely going to be the future globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nura. You know, we're coming towards the end of this, and we've just touched on things in just an hour. So hopefully, perhaps if we did a good job today, we can come back sometime to the LANDac and to the Land Portal Foundation to provide some more sessions and roundtables on blockchain use. That would be terrific. And so finally, I'd just like to thank the LANDac International and Land Portal Foundation for allowing us to do this, and for their support as well. And also on behalf of the Government Blockchain Association and the Foundation for International Blockchain and Real Estate Expertise, FIBRE, I'd like to thank them for helping me organize this session. And those would be my concluding remarks. And I think
John, the FIBRE likes to thank you for chairing this session. You did it wonderful.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we have a
great job, John.
Thank you, John. I think I don't know how the lights go out on this, but
it's not a good phrase, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Obviously, the four of us up there.
Right.
Yeah, hello. I think we had a wonderful session, and I'll be looking forward to the next one as quickly as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah, great job.
Okay.